Today, Liz Murphy, the founder of Santosha Nutrition, is here to talk plant-based nutrition. Liz, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited for this conversation. Um, could you start off and just maybe talk about your inspiration behind Santosha?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot, so let me see how condensed I can make it. But what I always say and what you'll like find in like articles and things is that the inspiration or basically the idea behind it is incredibly simple. It's kind of an epiphany that I had myself, and it was that eating more plants can change the world. So at its basic, I think that's kind of the inspiration behind the company as a whole. And what that really means to me is it doesn't mean I'm trying to get everyone to go vegan as much as I would love that to happen. I know that it's not necessarily realistic, but I truly believe that eating more plants can change the world from every aspect for your own personal health, for the planet's health, and for the animals. So that's kind of the main goal. But in a bigger picture, the inspiration behind it was a long time coming in my own personal journey of figuring out what diet and what lifestyle was best for me. And through that long, probably 10 plus year journey, I landed in a plant based space. And that's, inspired me to share that with others.
So, with this plant-based eating, can we dive a little bit deeper into because you mentioned kind of three facets to this. You mentioned, better for first of all your body, and then also the planet, and then of course the animals and um, just the farming conditions. So could we kind of take a look at each one of those aspects and I mean this will probably tie more into your personal journey as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Which one should we start with?
Well, let's start with with the planet and the farming aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that we're starting with that just because I also feel like that's one that everyone can relate to. I think that, at this point, at least, on our side of the world, we're kind of being bombarded in a good way with information about organic, non GMO, like kind of just like the basics of this whole concept. Once you start to take a deeper dive into the industrialized farming industry, both from growing plant side of things, so all of our produce, and then, of course, with the industrialized animal agriculture, it's very difficult to turn a blind eye once you start to take that deep dive. It's easy to turn a blind eye if you decide that it's not something that you want to look into or it's not something that you want to hear. And of course, that is kind of what the majority of our society is choosing to do right now. But for myself, it started, and we'll get into that in the next part, but it started with my personal health. But through that journey, I started to learn more about, kind of started with organic. And it's like, what is organic? Why organic? What are these concepts? And then when I went plant-based, I then started to look into the animal agriculture, which, kind of drew me into the animal rights activism area. And yeah, I mean, it's no, I think it's not a hidden idea that industrialized agriculture, both on the produce and the animal side of things, is a huge contributing factor to the climate crisis, for many reasons. And there's so much information that people can find about all of those things, and it's just immense and overwhelming, and and I feel really responsible to do at least my personal part in that by choosing to support as much of a sustainable food system as I can. And that doesn't mean I'm perfect. That's one thing I always like to talk about with people is like, I am very much not perfect. I'm always learning. And I still purchase things in plastic when I want a product that comes in plastic, but I avoid it as much as I can. And there's just so many ways that we can choose individual actions that will make a difference. And eating plant forward or eating more plants is one way that we can do that. And of course, there are many others as well. But yeah, I think another thing is that when we look at what's happening with our industrialized agriculture industry, it can be a little bit discouraging as well. Because at the end of the day, for any of these global issues that are happening, the only way that any of it's going to change is through corporate responsibility. So individual actions can feel small, but I've seen firsthand the difference that it can make by setting examples, inspiring others, and that makes its way up to the top. So I truly believe in grassroots, and that's kind of what, you know, Santosha and everything else that I'm working on would fall under.
Yeah, I don't want to leave this topic just yet because I think this is the piece of it that's so important because we have, we moved very much away from an agrarian in a very short amount of time from an agrarian society into this industrialized farming society. And before we leave this topic, I think just this focus on how much of this industrial farming, growing the plants and the food, the plant-based foods is going to support then the meat market.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's something, I mean, because I feel like, yeah, I mean, even myself, this is something that while I'm highly passionate about, I haven't dedicated time to researching. And so it's hard to find, um, it's hard to find good information, I feel like, in this area. The only piece that I've kind of dived deep into is the glyphosate part of it. And even that is super confusing.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And that's like one piece, like, well, obviously, like
Yeah.
one piece that's affecting a lot of humans. You know, if for any listeners that aren't familiar, I'm assuming that most people that listen to this podcast are familiar with glyphosate and what it is. But a lot of these, you know, you can take, I think like you have to kind of look at it in pieces. So that would fall under for me more of the like non-GMO organic, like why people are kind of attempting to learn more about and find answers for healthful reasons, because they're finding that themselves and their communities are being affected, their bodies are being affected by the way that we have developed our agricultural system, um, you know, with different pesticides, and different modifications to the food that are causing us to have reactions, myself included. And then, so that's one piece. And then that's where we kind of like are trying to move towards organic. But then you have the piece where industrialized agriculture, and this is something that I focus a lot on, its effect on our global soil health and how that's going to affect future generations of food. And something that you mentioned was how quickly the way that we farm has changed. And that has a lot, there's so many pieces to that. I think that a lot of the things that are affecting the climate crisis, like our farming system, single-use plastic, like a lot of these issues were not born out of, you know, an idea to cause problems. These were created because the people that invented them originally thought that they were going to have a positive impact on the world. We're going to be able to feed our growing population by industrializing our agricultural system. We're going to be able to save a lot of time and money and create convenience, even save water through single-use plastic. And, you know, like always, we have just kind of taken things too far. And so in regards to soil health, the reason that I like to mention this is because I think a lot of people aren't aware of it. I'm going to shout out one of my favorite documentaries about this that I think gives you the best information. And it's called The Need to Grow. And it focuses specifically on our global soil health. It talks about why we are losing soil health at such a rapid rate across the globe. And the main reasons for it are monocropping, which is the most common practice in industrialized agriculture. And what that means is that really common, especially with crops like corn and and soy that are so popular for fillers, for animal feed, that we need a lot of in a world where we have a lot of processed food. We have, you know, so much animal agriculture that needs to be fed. They're not switching the crops. And when you have, for example, you're growing a crop of corn, that corn is taking specific nutrients out of the soil and maybe giving some of it back. And so throughout human history, it was known, and smaller farmers that are still practicing this, it's very important to rotate crops so that you are taking different nutrients out of the soil and giving different nutrients back, and rotating those out so that you are regenerating and keeping the soil healthy so that the future crops will have nutrients to absorb. And we're essentially killing our soil across the globe by growing these insanely massive crops over and over and over on the same soil, and using pesticides and all these different things that are killing our soil. And you know, there's some, I'm not going to like throw out a ton of statistics, but one of the ones that sticks out to me is that you know, if we are to continue the way that we currently are without making changes, you know, there's an estimation, I'm not going to be exact, somewhere between like 60 and 100 years of farmable soil left on the globe.
Wow.
Because we're killing it. We're still going to be able to grow things, but we're not going to be growing nutrient dense food in any way. And a lot of places are not going to be able to plant because the soil is too, it just basically turns into dirt. So like there's a significant difference between biodiverse rich soil and dirt. You know, and dirt is that kind of hard stuff. I think you see it a lot in San Diego when we try to plant gardens. It's just this like hard rock of soil that's in our backyard, or of dirt. So that is a huge one for me. And so there's this whole movement towards regenerative agriculture, you know, small and large farms attempting to I would say change, but I always hate using the word change when I'm talking about any of these subjects, because we're actually going back
Right.
to practices
Yeah.
that have been around for most of human history, you know, prior to these inventions and these ideas, you know, some of them as small as 50 years ago. So whether we're talking about single-use plastic or, you know, agriculture and the way we do it today, it's more of going backwards to move forwards versus changing, or this like radicalization, because in reality, it's just kind of taking what we used to do, mixing it with the incredible modern science that we have in order to attack the climate crisis.
I love that you mentioned biodiversity and when you were talking about this, because I feel like that's another piece of it that is so often lost, is that we don't really view, you know, the soil that we're planting in as being truly biodiverse. So could we maybe, and then this might lead a little bit more into the organic versus conventional or industrial fertilizers.
Yeah.
You know, the difference between those and what they do to the soil.
Yeah, and I think, you know, for people that have never gardened or like farmed, they might not be as familiar with like the soil that you potentially are working with. And you can tell the difference, you know, if you pick up a handful of dirt and you pick up a handful of soil, the dirt is going to generally be like crumbly, you know, a lighter color. You're not going to see any like organisms, and a really healthy biodiverse soil is going to like smell like what we consider dirt to smell like. It's going to, you know, smell rich. It's going to be very moist. You're going to see things crawling through it. You know, and that's kind of what you think of as biodiversity. And I think a lot of people associate the word biodiversity with, rightfully so, with like ecosystems like the Amazon rainforest, or the way that we're killing biodiversity kind of on a larger scale. But this is kind of goes into the biodiversity on a microscopic level, and you can follow that to like the biodiversity of our own gut microbiome, right? Like it kind of just goes in pieces down. It almost mirrors each other, you know, as so many things do in nature. And yeah, so that biodiversity in the soil is being taken away by the monocropping, is being taken away by conventional uses of fertilizer. You know, if you follow the use of conventional pesticides, it goes all the way back to World War One, and they were actually like chemical warfare. That were then, after that use was finished, the companies decided, oh, we could use this to kill like the pests that are killing our food, which again, they had to know that it would be detrimental to human health, but it also was a way to increase the amount of food that was able to be grown at the time with a growing population post-war. And so I don't like to put like a lot of negative blame. You know, I think that we of course can and should when it comes to the profitization of all of these things. But I like to think of it from a lot of perspectives of like, okay, what could have been the reasoning behind it as well, or what was the reasoning behind it for like a positive global impact that unfortunately has gone the other way. So yeah, we've lost that biodiversity in such a major amount of our global earth, and farming earth. And so there's a great movement, especially with smaller local farms, to regenerate that through a lot of hard work, by, of course, composting, adding amendments, rotating their crops, planting native plants, like all this way to bring that diversity back to the soil, and create this movement to help us basically save our global food system.
Okay. All right. Switching gears a little bit and talking about what it is for, each one of our bodies. And here, I'll let you speak to your own experience.
Yeah. So on my own experience, like I'll try to do this quick. And I'm like so tired. This is a podcast. I guess I should talk, but talking a ton. So I'm 31 now. When I was 19, and like a few years prior to turning 19, I started to experience some symptoms that were kind of like, I went to doctor after doctor, like, couldn't figure out what was going on. And it was just kind of generalized things like fatigue, inflammation, joint pain, a lot of food intolerances. So the first thing that we figured out was that I was having reactions to wheat, not the gluten protein, not celiacs, but wheat, which is often associated with glyphosate and like gastrointestinal reactions that people are having to pesticides in food, and like the modifications and different things like wheat specifically. And it just couldn't really figure out what was going on. In the long run, I was eventually diagnosed with like an autoimmune, but the first thing that I was able to do that I could control was my diet. And I will say, like at the time, I was basically the opposite, not the opposite of vegan, because I've never been a huge meat eater, but I was in college. I was not in any way a healthy eater. Like I was eating the classic college foods, the ramens, the mac and cheese, pizza, like all these things. So it was like wheat all day long,
Yeah.
forever. So that had a lot to do with it as well. But I was able to make these changes, because it was the only way that I could find some relief from these symptoms that I was experiencing was through my diet and my lifestyle. And so like it took a
Can we just pause right there and talk about how huge that is?
yeah.
I mean, that is incredible, because so often we approach this completely backwards and are reliant on, just putting drugs into our system to manage the things. Okay. I love
Yeah,
that.
you're right. I'm glad that you acknowledge it, because it is kind of like, it's been so long and it's been such a big part of my life, and I forget that, like, yeah, that's a huge thing that so many people don't realize for so long, or never realize.
Yeah.
And I will say, like, a couple of caveats to that. Like, one, it was not an overnight thing, because my lifestyle was my lifestyle. Like, it took probably a year. I would say it took a year before I stopped eating wheat, because I was like, this is what I eat. I don't know what else to eat.
Yeah.
But eventually the symptoms were so bad that I was like, okay, I have to try something. And then, I'd say after about a year, I started to like make that adjustment. Then with changing my diet to basically focusing on like less processed was like number one. So I started with eating less processed food. That helped. Then I started to focus on increasing like my fresh like produce, and even, like fresh fish and like different things like that. And then it just kind of, with more energy came more movement. With more movement came healthier body. So it's just kind of like this progression over time towards
Yeah.
being healthier. Um, and the other thing is that not everything is right for every body. Like that's something I definitely acknowledge, not only because I witness it like in the world, that like different lifestyles work better for different bodies, but also my own has changed. Seems like every couple of years it changes in what works best for it, what it likes, and I have to be in tune with that as much as possible. And so I have adjusted it, and then eventually coming to plant-based, over time, both because I just like felt that it, like, as I ate more plants and kind of got away from especially dairy, and heavier meats, like I just felt better. So it was like a natural progression. Um, and then when I started to learn about animal agriculture and animal cruelty in that industry, it was just it was like almost like a night and day thing, where it was just like, oh, like I cannot support this, and I won't. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I mean, there's so much there in the morality and the ethics
Yeah.
around, yeah, just around going plant-based. And I know I'm in my own kind of I'm very much an omnivore.
Hmm.
Um, there are times when I definitely struggle with the meat consumption. Uh, I think maybe along those lines, could we focus just on dairy for a little bit? Talk about would it be possible to talk about, because here I think dairy is also, it's such a big part of my diet.
Hmm.
Like I can't imagine, I could imagine being vegetarian. I could not imagine being vegan.
Okay. I'm just curious, like, what are the dairy products that are like your staples that you just can't fathom, giving up?
So yogurt is the biggest one.
Yeah.
And I've tried
Okay.
plant-based yogurts. They do not do
Yeah.
it for me.
Okay.
Yogurt definitely is the biggest one. However, I also, I mean, I love milk. I love cheese, um, creamer,
Yeah. Yeah.
just all of
I
it.
I think for me, dairy was the last thing too. Like I think there's so many labels, but I think I went vegetarian, for a while before I chose to go full vegan. And that was because I was like, not, and for me, it wasn't like big staples. Like I was fine switching over to vegan cheeses, vegan yogurts. But if I like ordered a pizza or something, I didn't seek out vegan cheese. I just ordered cheese on it. Like I just wasn't
Yeah.
really like fully in. And I think dairy is a lot of times the hardest thing for many people. What I hear the most often for sure. And so for me, I think that it took learning what was happening in the industry to really kind of push me over the edge personally. Um, and I will again say that I would consider myself to be a little bit more realistic. I'm going to talk about my own experiences and what I believe will be the most helpful for the planet and for everyone. But we're all on our own timelines, and we're all on our own journeys. And if you are somebody that is not ready, or may never be ready to fully give up animal products, I would say the most important thing is to educate yourself as much as possible so that you have the information. It really bothers me when people, are combative about, which you are not at all, but when people are combative about their products, but they're not willing to open their eyes to where it's coming from. Um, because then it's denial. Because
Right.
if you know about it and you still choose to support it because you're not ready, that's fine. And I think it's very important to know what's going on. The other thing too is that in regards to animal cruelty, I am personally focused mostly on industrialized agriculture. There are small farms that are, when it comes to dairy, there are small farms that are producing local, organic, well-loved animal produced dairy. But most people aren't willing to take the time, money, and energy that's required to find that, and support that.
So maybe this is where we can focus the conversation on,
Mm-hmm.
because this leads us into that. This leads us back to what you said at the beginning about the grassroots movements
Yeah.
and about staying local. And because I mean, once again, this is something I struggle with, is finding um the local, I mean, because ultimately when I buy raw milk, it goes bad in 2 days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I don't drink it that fast. So then I'm left with, okay, well, I'm going to opt for organic grass-fed dairy at the grocery store. It at that point it's still homogenized, which I don't know if you
Mhm.
have anything to talk about the homogenized pasteurized piece of it. Um,
Not as much, and only because at this point I've been so removed from like
okay.
like the actual like animal product space, that I'm not as up to date on like all of the impacts of a lot of those things. um as far as like I think I'm more can speak to like the animal cruelty that's taking place within those
Yeah.
industries when
Okay.
you're supporting, and when you are purchasing from a store like a grocery store, it
Yeah.
can almost be said, I'm not going to say 100%, but like 95% of those products are supporting
Animal
animal
cruelty.
cruelty. And
Okay.
that, I think people is something they don't want to see or hear. Um,
Yeah.
and some stores will carry like one or two products, maybe. If the more local you get in the store, the more likely you are going to find products that are better to support. Um, and it's also an accessibility thing, a food justice and social issue. When you talk about all of this, I think it's really, really important to acknowledge the fact that a lot of the more quote unquote sustainable products are more expensive right now. And so they are not accessible to everyone.
Yeah.
It's something that I see constantly. It's not in every community. It's not so I definitely always want to acknowledge the fact that what we're talking about are currently like privileged things.
Yeah.
Um, but that being said, if you have the resources to support the right stuff, we need to be doing it because not everyone can and it's not available to everyone. And so, how are these things going to grow in demand if the people that have the resources to support them aren't?
So what is the best way? How can somebody locally, and here we can drop right into what we do here in San Diego, if
Mm-hmm.
needed. Like what are some great resources for people here, in
Yeah.
San Diego County to figure out where to
Yeah.
support
I would
local
say
dairy?
like a big one for me would be resources like Edible San Diego is huge.
Okay.
They're actually like a local online and print magazine company, but they like focus specifically on the food system here in San Diego. They provide a ton of information and resources. Their last issue had a big piece on like local regenerative animal agriculture, which I don't even know how long sitting reading it over and over, just trying to like figure out how I felt. Because and this is actually this is the first time that I am like publicly saying this out loud as um, a vegan and a vegan business owner. Um, my life straddles a line between veganism and sustainability because as much as those intersect, there are some points where that does not overlap. And I think regenerative animal agriculture, local, small regenerative animal agriculture is one of those places that it doesn't overlap.
Okay.
Because with the majority of the population choosing to eat animal products, as somebody focused on sustainability, I have to realistically understand that I have to support the idea of regenerative animal agriculture because that is the only way um, to truly support sustainability if you are choosing to purchase those products. And so a place like Edible San Diego is providing our local community with information and resources from all aspects. They support vegan diets, vegan chefs, so much about our farmers, our local produce like producers. Um, but seeing them, you know, have that in their issue was just really it basically like forced me to face something that I've been grappling with for a long time. It's not something that I will personally support because I've found my own way to live as sustainable as I can. And my choice is to not support animal agriculture in any way because I don't, at this point, like the animal I don't believe that there is any way to humanely kill a being that doesn't want to be killed.
Yeah. I
And so
mean,
when,
I absolutely agree with you. And
yeah,
yeah, I'm still eating meat. But
yeah.
I mean,
And so
this
there's
is
a
something
dissonance
I'm
there.
very much
Yeah.
wrestling with. Yeah.
Yes. And I mean, I think a lot of people don't even like get to that point of, inner conflict. They kind of just
Yeah.
ignore it. But if you think about it from that perspective, like if you can't humanely kill something that doesn't want to die, then there's not a way that I can support animal agriculture. But I would say the dairy industry done in a sustainable way, I again would not choose to consume that. For me, it's more for health reasons now. If we get into that,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but um, but yeah, but if you're gonna if you choose to, I would say like dairy and finding like sustainable ways to support that. I'm not as familiar. I know that we have like San Diego. We have one that's called like San Diego Tofu and Dairy. I'm not entirely sure what products they make, but I do know that like the refilleries sometimes carry their products. Like local stores are always carrying their products. So like I think that's a great option to look into for people that, still consume dairy. There are amazing local cheesemakers in San Diego, both vegan cheesemakers and, animal based. And so farmers markets, it's really like a hierarchy for me, talking about that privilege and accessibility, but farmers markets for me, it's like a start at the farmers market. If you can't find what you're looking for, go to the most local store you can find. And then from there, if you end up shopping at, industrialized big box stores, just do exactly what you mentioned, which is look for, like, read the labeling. Don't always believe the labeling. If you're willing to like
That,
do a Google search
yeah.
because you might find that, you know, that brand of milk has all these buzzwords on the label, but then when you go back to, there'll be articles and information about their true practices.
And I think this is something else where I struggle with so much because it'll have grass fed with the asterisk, and then you're looking on the entire box trying to figure out what does the asterisk mean? Does it mean, they were finished with grass fed? Does it mean they're still
Mhm, mhm.
stalled? What does it mean? Are they
Yeah,
actually on the pasture?
it's almost, I would say it is impossible unless you go live on a homestead to not
Yeah.
support negative impacts, Um, you can ask any like small environmental conscious brand, they have to make a lot of sacrifices that are not aligned with
Yeah.
their mission in order to get their products on the shelves. And that is, it's it's really eye-opening because I think especially like when I first started my sustainability journey and was like trying to find the best brands and support local and do all these things, it's like no matter what I did, I was always like, okay, but this is in plastic, or this is like it's a glass jar with a plastic top or whatever. Like it's just like
Yeah.
there's never it's very, very difficult and very, very expensive, especially for the smaller brands. And so I've listened to and read a lot about these kind of like sacrifices that they have to make, that can be with, if you don't have the information as a consumer, which is very hard to get, you may not know the story behind it. And one of my favorite examples of that is a company called Regrained from, I think they're out of Los Angeles, I'm pretty sure. They were and I think are taking like the grains left over from the beer industry and making bars out of them. So upcycling, keeping that grain from going into the landfill. And the first time that I saw them, like, and they still, I believe, come in plastic packaging. And I listened to a podcast with the founder and he talked about that. And it was like they tried compostable packaging, they tried all these things, and their products were going bad on the shelves because compostable packaging doesn't provide the same amount of food shelf stability. And so they had to decide between their mission of saving food from going to waste and packaging it in plastic, and they chose their mission. And so that's something I always tell people is like, there is no way right now, especially as like individuals living our busy lives, to make the right decision every time. And so the best thing we can do is decide what's most important to us right now, in these environmental issues, and find ways to support that the best way that we can with whatever resources we have.
Yeah. I I love that. I mean, I think so. It's a really sad situation that we're in, as a society, as a world right now, because consumerism has led us here. And I mean, we
Mhm.
are so, it is so different and kind of so detached from, what it was again, even just 100 years ago or, but I also think that I love what you just said about you really having to stay true to yourself and decide for yourself what's most important. And when you operate from that space, it's a lot easier to make decisions instead of feel like you're constantly in this decision fatigue and decision
Yeah.
overwhelm kind of state
Yes.
or information overload state. Um, I, I mean, sorry, I'm trying to decide what I think I want to stick with with this kind of sustainability piece of it and just well
Mhm.
and honestly talk about Santosha a little bit more because with
Mhm.
your goal or with Santosha, I mean you have at least one cookbook. I believe you have two or three.
Yeah, I have one.
Okay,
Two or
you
three
have one.
someday. But yeah, I do have a cookbook. So when I first started Santosha in 2018, it was like a huge leap of faith. Because I was actually working in like the corporate world in hotel sales management, and like working my way up that and like was excelling. I loved my job. I'm a very, I need people. And so like it was, very people oriented. And but I've always had an incredible passion for cooking from a very young age. And never was able to pursue that in any sort of professional manner, never chose to pursue that. I wanted to go to culinary school, but my parents were like, don't do that. And I'm actually really grateful, as much as it devastated me at the time, like that is a very difficult industry to, find footing in. And culinary school is very expensive. So it was just always something like a hobby that I always was cooking for friends and family and my roommates. Like I was always just like cooking all the time. And I just felt something was missing. I was definitely in like a transitional point around like 2017, 2018, looking for like what is missing. Cause like I'm happy in my job, like I get paid well, like what's going on? Like why do I feel like something is missing? And so I actually ended up like kind of investing in myself and taking like a small like coaching program, like to kind of like try to figure out what was going on. And like right away that catapulted me into like figuring out that it had to do with like food and nutrition and sustainability and like all these things. And I was just like, okay, but what do I do with that? Like it has
Yeah.
nothing to do with what I'm doing right now. Like, what am I supposed to do? But I have always been someone that when I get an idea in my head, I can't really stop thinking about it or stop working on it until it comes to fruition, which is a double-edged sword for sure.
Yeah.
But I mean, I started to work on this in like January of 2018, and I launched Santosha in June of 2018. So like it was a very quick turnaround of figuring out, well, like I can tell that this is what I'm yearning to do, so let's, figure it out. So in that time frame, I went to some like some certification programs through eCornell on like plant-based nutrition, wellness, health, like the science behind it, so that I could have a little bit more of a foundation besides just me loving plant-based food. And when I launched it in summer of 2018, it began as like a nutrition coaching, like a plant-based nutrition coaching business. Because as much as I wanted it to be food focused, without the technical background or any professional background, I had no confidence in anybody wanting to eat my food or anything. But within like 4 to 6 months of starting it, it evolved very quickly into a food-based business just because, I would bring food as a part of the maybe like an event or something or a workshop. And the food was what people were focused on. Then I was getting inquiries for catering, like all these things. So I like quickly adjusted the business to be a food-based business. And then over the next year or so, pre-pandemic, like 2019, I had been previously like in the interim working for a company a lot of people have probably heard of called Imperfect Foods, which is a grocery delivery service focusing on saving food from going to waste. And during my time there, it opened my eyes completely to the food industry and the food waste. And worked so much in that space with them while building Santosha that it started to integrate itself, that those concepts started to integrate themselves very naturally into what I was doing. And throughout 2019, it just kind of evolved into this is what it is. This is my focus. It's sustainability in our food system through delicious plant-based food. And so any way that I can get that in front of people is why I do like so many different things, is because anything that matches that description, I'm all in. So like that includes the farm to table dinners that we do, cooking classes, going into companies and giving presentations and then giving them a buffet, the cookbook, like all of these pieces fit that, sustainability in our food system through delicious plant-based food. So yeah, so that's kind of like everything I listed off is kind of the stuff that we focus on now. And the cookbook is incredibly surreal and would not have happened without the pandemic. Like I will say that is my positive from the pandemic, is that I run an in-person event-based, experience-based business. And so I was completely lost on how to make money, what to do, where to focus. I had wanted to write a cookbook, had kind of started the process and was able to publish it during the lockdown. Yeah.
Okay, and then one more thing on that. I love how you focus on the different seasons, because this is something we haven't, in all of our talking, we haven't talked about that seasonal piece of it.
Which is like the main thing I talk about in my work life. So silly.
Yeah, I love that the cookbook is broken down that way into the different seasons, into what's actually growing and ripe and all of that kind of thing. And I'm assuming that you're also, because since you stay away from wheat, that many of your recipes are also maybe grain free or alternate grains.
So alternate grains. So the cookbook is 100% gluten free. So it's alternate grains. There are a lot of grain free recipes in there. I would say like only a few actually have grains. It's just I just label the whole book as gluten free. And it is set up seasonally, and that is very much for like the two main reasons that I encourage people to support seasonal eating. Like there are many, many, many reasons. I do full workshops on seasonal eating alone, like I did at Corinne's place. But one is the sustainability aspect of, if you are finding seasonal food at any of those levels we talked about before, farmers market, local market, even the grocery store, there's a better likelihood that you are supporting organic farmers that are doing it in the correct way and not growing things out of season and pulling them too early. And then on that note, it's for the flavor. So like from a culinary aspect, the flavor of in-season food versus out-of-season food is just like astronomical. Like I can't even tell you how many times I've been doing any of the events, a cook like a farm to table dinner or a cooking class, and people are tasting the food, and it's a very simple food focused on like the ingredients that we're using, and they're like, how does it taste like this? Why does it taste like this? And I'm just like, it's because I got it from a farm that grew it within 20 miles of here, so they got to pick it at peak freshness. And I'm like, this is what a tomato tastes like. I think that's like the most common one, because when you're buying tomatoes in the store, especially out of season, it tastes like nothing.
Exactly.
Like they have no flavor. And so a lot of people who haven't tried an in-season tomato like have no idea that a tomato tastes how it does, so delicious, so full. So yeah, seasonal eating is a huge part of like my business and the education that I'm trying to give people to become a more positive part of their own local food system.
Okay. And then, because we haven't mentioned it yet, you also have another business.
Yes. Yeah. So I also run or founded a nonprofit called Sustainability is Sexy. It's a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And it was founded in 2021. So in like the depth of the pandemic. And it was founded for many reasons. It was kind of developed, like I had an idea, and then I also found that a couple of my close ecopreneur friends that also have like eco-focused small businesses in San Diego, we kind of like would get together because we're all friends. And there was just this idea born of like, okay, like we're all in the middle of this lockdown. Even pre-pandemic, we felt that there was just kind of this lack of connection between sustainable businesses and then between sustainable businesses and the community. And so we were just like, how do we bridge that gap? And so that's kind of like the basic idea of how it was born. And for me, the reason that I wanted to start something is because, over the course of becoming more sustainable in my own life, not just around the food system, but in kind of every aspect of my own lifestyle, I wanted to share that information so badly. And I was sharing it through my Santosha work and platform. And it was kind of muddying the message because like I'm a food-based business and I focus on the food system, and that's what I talk about all the time. So when I was coming in and being like the ocean, plastic, like all these other things, people were just like, what? Like, what do you do? And so Sustainability is Sexy provided me this incredible platform to be involved in whatever sustainability industry project support system I wanted to be without taking away from my real focus in the food system at Santosha. And so because it was born in the pandemic, we started with a podcast that is still going strong. We're on the third season. It's called Sustainability is Sexy, the podcast. It's very easy to remember. You can find it on any platform. It's a great way to learn about, for anyone, but San Diegans very specifically, because it focuses on San Diego resources, organizations that you probably don't know about, that are amazing and so cool. But it's great for anybody anywhere because the things we talk about, regardless of where this, the organization is based, is applicable no matter where you live. And so we have the podcast, we do community events where our vendors are like very vetted and like basically providing a platform for local sustainable resources, nonprofits, and businesses. And then we just have a lot of projects that we work on, like education, where we provide zero waste education to communities, companies, schools. And then our biggest, newest project is our zero waste event services. So we did a pilot program in April, Earth Month, and we worked with a couple of events to provide them with like pre-event consulting for zero waste strategies that we've developed through putting on our own events. And then for these two, we were actually able to go on site as well and run like basically waste sorting on site, provide them with impact reports. We weigh every piece of waste that comes through, we divert it to the correct stream, and then we provide them with an impact data report that they can have year-over-year data of like hopefully increases in diversion. And I think living in Southern California, one of the most like event heavy areas in the world, there's such an opportunity to divert the immense amount of waste that's created by these events. And so we're just kind of starting one of those tiny grassroots projects to address something that we see happening in our own community.
I think one question on that. So when you're talking about diverting the different waste streams, is it still mixed plastics, mixed recyclables, so including cardboard and that kind of thing? So is it just the difference between compost, truly landfill, and then whatever is recycled?
Correct. So it'd be the three big ones: landfill, recycling, and organics.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. I have not checked out your podcast yet, but I really want to learn more about Sustainability is Sexy.
Yeah, I also really love it. And I think the feedback we've gotten is really good because the episodes are really short. So they're like, I think I love listening to a good long podcast, especially if it's full of like all this awesome information. But ours so far have been focused on kind of providing a snapshot of like a cool resource or business that you could like listen to while you walk your dog or like run a quick errand and just be like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that existed. And then you can learn more about it by looking into it. But yeah, they're pretty short, anywhere between like 15 and 30 minutes, just to provide people with really cool information. I learned so much being the host of that podcast. Like most of these places I didn't know about before we had them on the podcast. And so it's a great learning experience for me as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. As we start to wrap up, how can people connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm very active on Instagram. As much as I hate saying that, but that is where I am most active, and it's a great resource to connect with me. The websites for both of the organizations as well. Everything for both of them is just the names of the organization. So santoshanutrition.com, Santosha Nutrition on Instagram, and all of the other platforms. The websites always have like a contact form as well that you can just reach out if you want to do direct contacting. Sustainability is Sexy is sustainabilitysexy.org. And then it's actually SIS underscore San Diego on Instagram. But if you were to type in Sustainability is Sexy, you would find it. But yeah, following on the Instagram platform, if it's something that you have, is a great way, because for both of the organizations, that's where I'm posting most actively about all the really cool events that are taking place all around the county. You know, there's usually a couple per month between the two. So definitely following on Instagram is a great way to stay up to date. But if you don't have or prefer not to be on social media, you can sign up for our newsletters on either of the websites as well.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Liz, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. As you can tell, I'm a bit of a talker, so I always appreciate, you know, the opportunity to speak about these things that are so important to me, to share it with new communities. And it's, you know, our first time kind of connecting a little bit more. So let's do it again.
Yeah, definitely.